Now let's talk about a term I'm sure you just heard me use and probably didn't know what it meant, and that is volume allocation. Volume allocation is an interesting term, and it basically just means moving around and mixing up your training volume between rep ranges and loads, and switching out some of your loads and rep ranges for one another. So for instance, if you've been focusing more and more and more on heavier and heavier and heavier work, and have allowed the lighter side of the rep range spectrum to become neglected, then you might want to allocate some of the heavy work volume into lighter work volume. All right, that makes sense, right? So where this concept comes into play is when you are programming your training week. And for certain exercises here and there that you have been doing really well at, you will be adding sets to them. What happens is, as this continues and you are amassing more and more volume, then having it be spread out among different loads and rep ranges becomes an issue, because you do not want it to become disbalanced in such a way that is disadvantageous to your training purposes. So for instance, if you're doing hypertrophy training, you might find you really enjoy high rep sets because they give you a massive pump and burn that you can really feel, and it gives you an endorphin rush. So you start doing more and more and more of it. And this quarter becomes half, and you start exploring even higher rep ranges than ever before, and suddenly you are really training for endurance, and you are starting to shred and lose size rather than gaining size, which is what your original training goal was for. So you want to make sure that your volume is allocated and spread out throughout the right loads and rep ranges for your purposes. But also, you do not want to be doing a lot more volume on one day and much less on others, all right? As this will cause your energy levels and fatigue to fluctuate too much. And you might even be overtraining on one day and undertraining on another. So you want your weekly training volume to be as evenly spread out as possible, and never be doing too much in one session, especially too much for one muscle in one session. And while this all may seem like it's a given and it's pretty basic stuff, it does get a little bit complicated when you are programming your training week and you have all of this volume and different amounts of volume for different muscles, and you are trying to organize it and group it together into workouts that go together and make sure that everything is spread out evenly. Well, this is where volume allocation becomes a thing. And this is part of the art of programming, okay? It is an organizational skill. So as you add exercises or sets, you will often have to rearrange the layout of your weekly volume and how you spread it all out amongst your weekly sessions. This can mean having to move things around and reallocate exercises and volume every week to keep your training levels and energy levels consistent throughout the week. Now, as I mentioned before, your volume allocation will differ based upon where you are at in your training year. And this is where periodization will start to come into play, something that I'm going to be teaching you so much about later in this program as you get more advanced. But for now, let me just say that when you are focused on hypertrophy and are doing a mass gain phase or a bulking phase, where you're going to do several blocks in a row of accumulating as much volume and workload as possible to cause massive hypertrophy adaptations, you're going to favor the additions of moderate and light loads, just like I taught you in the last class. And the volume of heavy work you are doing is going to stay the same, which actually means that it would get more marginalized in the ratio to moderate and light work. And then whenever you are going into a training phase where you want to be lifting heavier and heavier and working on strength and power, what you're going to be doing is the opposite, all right? And you are going to be focused more on heavy work, and you're going to drop down the volume of the moderate to light work so that you would be doing more heavy work in ratio to it. However, that doesn't mean that you're going to be doing a lot more heavy sets, all right? Because building strength is not about having a higher volume of heavy work, all right? It's about increasing the load more, all right? So you might actually be doing little to no light work and only a medium amount of moderate work. And the ratio of the amount of heavy sets you are doing will be greater, but your overall total volume will be very low whenever you are lifting heavier and heavier and heavier, or doing what is called a intensification phase. So whenever you are doing progressive overload for hypertrophy, that is called an accumulation phase. And that's about accumulating a massive volume of that moderate and light work, all right? And then whenever you are trying to get stronger, it's called an intensification phase. And you're going to seriously drop down the total volume you're doing by cutting out a lot of the light and moderate work.